Welcome to Dedicated. On this show, we often have household names, but with the asterisk that the household needs to be full of avid readers. Today, no asterisk required. I, of course, knew about Montel Williams from his Emmy Award-winning show. And when I was preparing for this conversation today, I learned that's only a small sliver of things. 22 years of military service, including a stretch in naval intelligence, a specialty in cryptography. Montel Williams retired from military service in 1996 with so many honors and commendations we can't even start to list them here. We'll run out of time. So when I learned that Montel was writing a book about the aircraft carrier Intrepid, I'd initially thought, well, Montel's a journalist and a great storyteller. It should be a good book. When I learned the rest of his career, I realized he is the perfect person to write this book. And I was right. It's terrific. I devoured it. It's full of cool naval history. It's well told. And it's also getting great reviews. I saw New York Post Best Book, Amazon Editor's Pick. So congratulations.
I'm so excited.
Well, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me, for sure.
And we're going to have some cranberry and sparkling water today.
Thank you so much.
Here.
Thank you.
Okay, great. We often will booze it up.
I know you have little cocktails, right?
Yeah, exactly. You're more of a maybe CBD.
Mine's a mocktail, huh?
A little mocktail for the day.
Yeah, I shifted over and do a little bit more CBD kinds of drinks. Oh my!
Sirius XM is not going to love that.
But I stopped. It's really very funny. I stopped drinking, not because I really wanted to, but out of choice for a diagnosis that I got years ago. So I've haven't had a drink, really, honestly, for 25 years. Yeah. I mean, I may sip a little bit of champagne on New Year's, but I kind of pass on it because medication I take, it has a weird reaction to it. So
yeah. I want to ask you about the MS stuff. Sure. I know you do a lot of advocacy for that.
Perfect. Thank you.
Sure. All right. So it's a kind of a rough weather day in New York. Plus, we've got the pollen out there crushing everybody. So.
And that's one of those things. Cheers. I've never had issues with pollen or those things until the last 3 or 4 years. And people have said to me, as you get older, I want to smack them upside the head. What do you mean get older? No, but it's truthful. I've never had issues with pollen or any kind of allergies whatsoever. And in the last 3 years, it has taken off like no tomorrow. And I do this show. It's called The Balancing Act, where about a week ago we were taping an episode, and I had a doctor on who was an ear, nose, and throat doctor, and this lady was like, she said, I said, she was coming on to talk about dry eye, and I was going, I don't have dry eye. I have this really weird thing where my eyes just pour water, my nose runs. She goes, that's dry eye. Oh. How can you have dry eye and have liquid in your eyes? She said, because what you don't understand is that in your eyelids, upper and lower, you have these glands that produce this special oil. That oil coats your eye, and then the water sticks to the oil. You think oil and water don't mix, but it sticks and works in your eye. When you don't produce enough of that oil, the water runs out of your eyes.
So you're overproducing the water.
So who knew? So here you go. I'm going to have to go to the drugstore and get something else.
That's interesting. My wife has dry eye. I don't know that she knows that whole backstory of it.
There's a new treatment for it, by the way. So anyway.
All right, we'll talk after because I want to know about that. She will want to know about that. So we'll start at the beginning, though. Born in Baltimore. And your dad was a fire chief, I think?
Yeah, well, he was a fireman. My dad was the jack of, it's very funny. I didn't know my dad was Jamaican until I was like 35, almost 36 years old, because he used to hide it and, wouldn't talk about it. But you know how Jamaicans always say, how many jobs you got? My dad was one of those guys who had like 5 jobs while I was growing up. One of them ended up being his primary job, which was being a firefighter. He worked for the fire department in Baltimore for 30 years and ascended all the way up to the rank of fire chief after 30 years. But he also held multiple cabinet posts in Baltimore, like from the Secretary of Transportation, Secretary of Energy. He did a whole bunch. Yeah, passed away a couple of years ago.
But, I wanted to ask that if they saw the stardom through the 90s and early 2000s, they both parents were able to see some of that.
Both parents were able to see that, which was really, I was very blessed with that. And and it was very funny. People have asked me all the time, why your show did take on kind of a different light. I said that's because my mother called me. My mother called me one time and said, "Do you really need to do those topics?" I was like, "Yeah, if you say no, I say no." And we shifted the show after I was on the air I was on the air for about 3 months, 4 months. My mom watched one particular show. Let me think of what it was. It was this crazy thing. If you go back to 1991 when my show actually started, there were only 4 talk shows. There was Oprah, Sally, Phil, and Geraldo.
I thought you overlapped with Donahue a little, no?
That's right. Phil. I said, so Oprah, Phil, Donahue,
I'm on a
Sally.
second name basis.
That's right. Sally and Geraldo. And even back then, Kathy Lee and the morning show that was Kathy Lee and Regis.
Oh, and Regis, yeah.
They weren't even considered a talk show. That was called an early access show. My show started in May of 91.
Yeah.
After my show started, that's when you had the plethora of talk shows began.
Yeah.
Ronald Reagan Jr. had a show. John Tesh, Lisa Gibbons had a show.
I forgot about those. Those
Chuck
were short-lived.
Woolery had a show.
Chuck
Jane
Woolery.
Pratt had a show.
Yeah.
All of them got canceled that year. I stuck around. Then it was after that you had Maury started. Then the J group, I used to call it, Jane Whitney, Jane Pratt, all those guys came along.
Yeah.
Then after that was Ricky Lake and that group.
Oh my
gosh.
And all that was within your 17-year span, all that turnover.
123 shows came and went during that 17 span.
Wow.
And I stayed in there. Yeah. It's good.
Yeah, I was going to, we'll get into some of that too. I was kind of interested if you miss it, but it's almost irrelevant because it's not, you were there in the golden age. Like you said, those names you picked, that was the center of the universe then. And the center of the universe is somewhere else now. Daytime talk seems a little tired these days.
Well, I think it's because they kind of shifted years ago to this format that really doesn't work in daytime. You have a lot of people who aren't necessarily sitting there waiting to be hawked something. And so, you got a lot of, and I'm not knocking celebrity appearances. Thank you so much for having me. I'm not knocking it. However, is it the most interesting thing? After 2 minutes, you tell me a movie. Okay, what's next?
That's right. And that's one of 50 stops they have along the way to talk about the movie, and it's sort of canned. And
Correct. So, I think, and now when we look at really how life is, there is a difference now. I think attention spans are so short. People rely so much on these things to grasp what they want. And so, I don't think there's attention span for an hour-long discussion about something of value.
It's weird because there strangely sometimes is, and we see it all the time, because I also think, I agree with you that attention spans are super short now, and it's Instagram shorts and YouTube shorts and things like that. And so we're conditioned to 30-second things, tops. And yet two things can be true at the same time, because Rogan does this 3-hour show. Even I can't do that.
There you go.
That's way too long. But there is room for a conversation. Some percentage of the people greater than zero is out there into a cool hour-long conversation.
I agree with you 100%. And I think, again, I'm not doing a side-handed kind of pat on the back, but Rogan hit a niche. And hit a niche, and there are people out there who appreciate him. So it doesn't matter what he's talking about; they're just going to listen to whatever he has to say.
Yeah, that's the new, in my view, that's the new center of the universe. It's Joe Rogan, it's Megyn Kelly, it's others like that.
I agree. I agree.
Yeah. All right, so back to Baltimore though for a second. We'll catch up to all this stuff. So you were a stud athlete, student, good athlete, president, I think, of the class, graduating.
I was a decent student. I played a lot. I played a lot. I played in a band. I played sports. I played in theater. I did a lot of the playing, and tried. It was very, very funny. I could not have gotten away with this now because some principal would have come down on my head. But, I think in my senior year, I think you could only miss maybe 35, 40 days of school. I missed almost 95 days of school. But why? Because I got my junior year. I became president of my class my junior year, president of my class my senior year. I was very big into student politics in the state and then the local level, and I got picked to be the student representative on the Board of Education for Anne Arundel County. The first time that they had ever picked a student to do that, and so being a little industrious, but recognizing that the board meeting that I was supposed to be at was going to be every Tuesday. So, I attended those board meetings every Tuesday, but then they started adding extra little sessions in. And so I started adding little extra sessions in. And then even when there weren't extra sessions in, I was adding little extra sessions in. So I was able to kind of skip a couple classes during my senior year, claiming I was going to the Board of Education, and nobody said a word. So I was
learning on the job.
That's right. There you go. There you go.
So, and you were not done with doing things for the first time for people. So you turned 18, joined the U.S. Marine Corps in 74.
Yes.
And in 1975, I was stunned that this was the year and that this happened, but you're the first black naval officer in the training academy there.
Well, no way.
1975, is that right?
I'll get it right for you. I literally was the first African-American Marine selected to go to the Naval Academy Prep School to then go on to graduate from the Naval Academy and be commissioned as a naval officer. First, there had been one Marine before me who got his commission back in the Marine Corps. But unfortunately for me, we didn't know this until 20 years later, but I probably had my first bout of MS right before I graduated from the Naval Academy. I went blind in my left eye, put me on a medical hold, and that stopped me from being able to go back into the Marine Corps because the Marine Corps requires you as an officer to have correctable vision in the 20/20. Mine's not correctable. So they forced me to go into the Navy. They gave me two options: supply corps, intelligence. And because at the academy I had studied Chinese, they figured, well, this guy's got a propensity for languages, so we can send him off to the Defense Language Institute and teach him Russian. So you're going to be a special intelligence agent. I was like, okay, that sounds cool.
So you speak Russian and Chinese now?
Well, what's that old saying? If you don't use it, you lose it. And I don't use it, so I lose it. When I was here and I lived in New York, I had a great opportunity to keep my Russian going, and I did because you jump in a cab down here, and I don't know. 30% of the cab drivers in this state, or back then when I was living here, were Russian. So I could get in a cab and carry on a conversation, kind of get a tutorial. But I haven't used it so much in the last 10 years. So
what was the and you got into cryptography as part of your naval intelligence time too?
Yeah, I was a cryptologic direct support officer, as that was what my official title is.
Yeah. And were you deployed at sea a lot during all this?
Oh my goodness, are you kidding me? I've got 300 days under the water on submarines. I've got 600 days on the water on aircraft carriers, destroyers, cruisers.
Wow.
You name it. Yeah.
What was it like being on a sub?
Crazy. I look back at that, I swear to you, I have on multiple occasions looked back at my life and said, did you do that? Yeah, I really did that. And, I'm glad I got through it. But I look back at it now and think, how the hell were you able to do that?
I don't think I'd be so claustrophobic down there in these, And
the type of missions that I did, and without violating any security violations or security regulations that I'm still under right now today, even though I've been out of the military for 40 years, I'm still under security constraints. But the missions that I did on submarines were hatch to hatch. So, you go out for 4 days, do what's called 5 days, do a workup, go out for 3 days, do a certification, then you go on your mission. And that mission was 90 days to 97 days, hatch to hatch. They close the hatch, doesn't open again for another 97 days.
Oh, my God.
Crazy. And
is there enough room around there to exercise? I think there's some movies of big subs where they're doing laps on some rail.
Those are called boomers. I was on 637 class submarines, which are fast attack submarines. And there's, let's put it this way. I worked out on every submarine I was on. I was kind of I call a weighthead, but I was a guy who, I consider myself a power lifter and a bodybuilder, and so I literally tried to take up as much space as I could in life. Which somebody made me think that the bigger you are, the more man you are. So I used to walk around 40 pounds heavier than I am right now. But I found ways to work out. I worked out every day on a submarine for 90 days under the water. I don't know if the way I did it was really smart, because I used to work out beside this thing. It's a real fusion device. We talk about, does fusion technology really work? Yes, it does work. We have a thing on board a submarine. It's called an O2 generator, because on submarines, they make their own oxygen. You draw in water, seawater, separate the hydrogen and the oxygen. You breathe the oxygen, you breathe it out. You got CO2. There are scrubbers in the submarine that scrub the CO2 out, kick it back over.
It's like Total Recall with Schwarzenegger.
Like one of those crazy things. Well, I'm telling you, I used to work out right beside the O2 generator every day, because that was the only space. On a submarine, that was the weirdest part about it, is that there's probably nowhere on a fast attack that I was on that you literally have a space more than 15 feet in front of you.
Yeah.
Nowhere. So your eyes don't adjust further than 15 feet. You don't walk more than 15 feet. Everything is so tight and compressed, so small.
Yeah.
So, when you walk off a submarine at the end of a mission like this, your eyes have to adjust to the sunlight. And the missions that we were on, there were only 3 people on the submarine that got an opportunity to look out the periscope. Myself, the captain, and the ops boss, or the executive officer. So 4 people. So nobody else got to look at it. Nobody else even knew where we were going.
That's why the physiology of your body, it's like being a miner in the turn of the century or something down below the ground.
If you look at, there's the one thing, you look at anybody who's a former naval officer or naval person who served on submarines, 90% of us have solid gray hair. because there's an issue with, over CO2 and lack of oxygen. Not that I'm complaining. I'm just saying that that's the truth. So, it was a crap. But again, I did that. What?
Yeah.
Yeah, I did that. Yeah.
What a crazy life.
Yeah.
So in 91, you're still in military service till 96. But 91, you launched your show.
Yes. I was in the reserves. In 91, I was doing something. I transferred over to the reserves, but I kept doing something called TEMAC, temporary active duty. I went back on active duty because I was speaking around the country, speaking in schools and things like that. And so they let me back on active duty a little bit, for a weekend here, a weekend there. Excuse me, a weekend here, a weekend there, a weekend here, a weekend there. I served out in the reserves to the point that, the more popular my show became, the harder it was for me to serve. And why? I was stationed, again, security constraints preclude me from discussing everything that I do while on active duty. However, I used to serve at particular units. They're called Naval Security Group activities, which are top secret facilities. And when I was stationed in Denver at one of the facilities there, of course, people found out that Montel Williams is working there. So in the mornings, there'd be 30, 40 cars out in front of his top secret facility trying to stop me from walking in the door to get a picture or an autograph or something. My CEO was like, dude, we got to do something about this.
What kind of ratings numbers were you pulling in the mid-90s?
Early 90s, again, if you look at the way things are now, people get by with ones and stuff. We were pulling threes and fours. I think there was a period of time in the early... Right before I won the Emmy, our show kind of peaked out. I think we probably hit a 5
That's
a couple
amazing.
times.
And there's not the top rated shows are going nowhere near that these days, right?
0.9s, 1.1s, yeah. So we had a lot of success. I know that one person hates when I say it, but I'm one of the only people that beat Oprah in Europe. So we used to stomp her, on occasion over there because that was the highest rated show at the time. And so that was really the competition really for us.
Yeah. Before we get into the Intrepid, I wanted to ask you a couple more things. First of all, I should have said this up top. Thank you for your service.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate that.
And
thank you to all your listeners who serve. Thank them for their service too.
Yes. And the other thing that you give back to the community in a number of ways, but you do an especially enormous amount of work to support veterans.
Absolutely.
And continue to do that. So that's fantastic. And I know you do a lot for MS too, so I wanted to ask about some of the things you're doing outside of the book writing before we get into the book writing.
Sure. I got to tell you, I'm working on so many crazy. Sometimes I try to figure out how the hell am I doing as many things I'm doing, but I'm doing them. I'm working on a lot of initiatives, especially warfighter initiatives. I've got a project that I've been working on now for almost 14 years. That's for all your listeners who, may have a family member or a service member or a friend who served, who's suffering right now with that invisible scar called PTSD. I've been working on a project now for 14 years, which is literally, truthfully, the only cure for PTSD that exists in the world. This has been validated by a group that's called the ISTSS, which is the international governing body that governs psychological protocols like this. This protocol is called RTM. It has now been proven through double-blind studies in King's College, Walter Reed. They've treated close to 1,000 people in America. 9 out of every 10 people who go through this protocol remit all symptoms of PTSD in less than 10 hours, no medication.
What can you describe the protocol? What's happening in that 10-hour
period? It's called a neurophysical intervention, where neurophysical psychological intervention, where a therapist, it's a type of talk therapy where a therapist will walk the patient through a way to reconsider, relook at their traumatic event.
Like not hypnosis, but like a version of like calling up the events to.
But a little bit different, because one of the most popular treatments, the standard of care, is something called prolonged exposure therapy, which we know doesn't work. Only 37% of the people who've gone through that protocol actually walk away with any relief. Mm-hmm. And most people walk away from it because it's so painful reliving that experience the way they have to. Plus, there are drugs involved. Mm-hmm. This one has been around now since 9/11, created by a doctor by the name of Dr. Frank Burke. Dr. Burke has made it his life's career to get this thing instituted, not only for our veterans, but also for anybody suffering PTSD, because it works for non-combat PTSD also. Sexual abuse, childhood trauma, it works. And again, what they do, if I could, at a layman's level, the therapist basically after establishing a relationship with the patient, makes the patient feel comfortable enough that you can then revisit the trauma, but you revisit it in a different way. You don't tell it. You act as if you're a projectionist in a movie theater and you're projecting your trauma on a screen for other people in front of you to take a look at. What happens is your brain processes that trauma, and they do it in a very strange way. You project it on a screen forward, project it on a screen backwards, project it in color, project it in black and white. And what most people don't understand is that PTSD is a physical manifestation as well as a psychological manifestation. It is actually hardwired in the amygdala of your brain. Why? Because it's literally part of our fight, flight process, which, if you remember when we were cave people, you and I hanging out in the cave, you got up in the morning, one morning and I'm just playing. You got up one morning, you walked out front, and I'm thinking I'm going to go get me some berries. And all of a sudden, this saber-toothed tiger jumped off the top of the hip, grabbed you by the head, dragged you down the bridge, and ate the heck out of you. Mm-hmm. I'm sitting inside of that cave looking at that, and I went, ah! That was hard written in my brain. From that point on, every time I see that saber-toothed tiger,
then you can pass it on.
I'm going the other way.
Yeah, yeah.
And so that's what happens with this therapy. And again, just double-blind studied at King's College in London. Mm-hmm. Just double-blind studied for a second time at Walter Reed. The lead psychiatrist at Walter Reed, who runs PTSD protocols, wrote in a peer-reviewed published document that this should be the standard of care. Mm-hmm. Yet we still have our veterans out here suffering endlessly. I just, I do a show that's called Military Makeover, where we make over the homes of some very, very deserving veterans. We make them over from the ground up. I'm talking about everything from the yard to the porch to the floor to the ceiling to the HVAC to the kitchen to you name it. And we turn their house into a forever home. We've done 43 homes to date. I'm doing one of these once a quarter. Every single veteran that I meet, I just talked to one 2 weeks ago. I was at his house where we literally had an interview, and we're going to start the process of redoing their home in about another 2 weeks. And that young man shot 3 times 15 years ago. Mm-hmm. Bears the brunt, the physical brunt and the scars. You see them. He's got them. Lost half of his tricep. Got shot in the chest, got shot in the leg. Mm-hmm. Serious injuries. But is the ones that you don't see that I recognize just in the conversation of he and I sitting there together. He's suffering from PTSD today as if this happened yesterday. Yeah. This is the kind of therapy that could help break that.
That's amazing. The part of it going and becoming physical makes sense to me because, with the saber-toothed tiger example you have, many people and many species are then born with the natural instinct. It's in the DNA. So
correct.
You can see how there is a sort of a physical expression of it that can then be passed on.
Sure.
All right, well, let's get into the sailing of the Intrepid. As I said, I love this book. There's so much naval history. Not, you go even earlier back than the sort of World War II piece of the Intrepid. One thing I learned, I didn't realize that ship names are almost like the numbers on a basketball jersey. Yes. Like the Celtics have a number of number 8s until they retire it. And so there are ships called the Intrepid before this Intrepid, and you were saying before we got rolling, there could be a new one. There could be a new one.
One of the first Intrepid was one of the most famous ships ever. This ship was called upon back in 1804 to literally go into the Barbary coast, or into where Tripoli is, because these pirates had basically captured what was one of our greatest warships at the time, called the Philadelphia. Mm-hmm. They had taken all the cannons off of it. They were using it to, exploit ships coming in and out of the Tripoli harbor. And the Navy decided to, reconfigure what's called a ketch, which is kind of like a small merchant ship, and clandestinely pulled it into the Tripoli harbor, and were able to pull it up right beside the Philadelphia, and then they set the Philadelphia on fire, and then they were able to escape. This thing changed naval history and naval warfare worldwide. Even the Pope commented at the time on the fact that this ship had done such an incredible job.
It's a great scene in the book, and it's early on when America was really untested in being able to project sea power anywhere out of like Manhattan Harbor, but we're across the world doing this as a young country, which is very cool.
And everybody took notice. And then from that point forth, we had a couple other Intrepids that, one was a training ship, one was basically a floating bomb. And then when it came time to literally name this ship, which was at the time the most advanced naval ship ever built, they decided, Intrepid was a good name, and it is a good name.
Yeah.
And it lived up to its name and its expectations.
Are you allowed to talk about what the next ship Intrepid might be?
It will probably be a destroyer. I know about this. I was just very funny. Secretary Del Toro, the former Secretary of the Navy, the one who just stepped down, actually wrote one of the forewords for my book. And Secretary Del Toro just reached out to me about a week ago and said his wife was on the commissioning committee for the new Intrepid. He said, "We really got to get you on." And I was like, "Wow, it's great. Yes, without a doubt." So I reached out to him and said, "Yeah, just call upon me and I'm there."
Does the Navy ever retire ship names? Like that's the Michael Jordan of ships. No one's going to name that again.
They do retire them completely. But there are some ships, and the name Intrepid is
it's a good name.
It's one to live up to. Yes, sir, for sure.
Yeah, I mean, if you're going to retire a ship name, that
would be the one to do it.
Deserves it. Yeah.
But you know what? It gives another ship an opportunity to live up to an expectation.
Yeah, well, that's true. So there are a couple other scenes in there that I wanted to ask you. The John Paul Jones tradition I thought was very cool. Just so readers know, there's so much history, naval history woven in here and well written, and it sort of brings the whole story to life here on the page, but there's some great facts.
That's where, when you cross, there are several places in the world where if a ship gets to sail over them, there are ceremonies that take place. And, when you cross the equator, there's a ceremony. That's called a ceremony where all those who have never crossed the equator before, you're called polywogs. And then, they will bring on King Neptune, who will then come on and, after a crazy ceremony on the ship's decks, you are christened, you're no longer a polywog. You're, a seasoned merchant or seasoned sailor. And the same thing happens when you cross into the North or the North Pole or the South Pole. There's a blue nose where you get a ceremony where you have to do the same thing. When you cross through the Panama Canal, there's a ceremony called the Order to Ditch. I happen to have all of them. I crossed into the Arctic on a submarine and literally actually popped up at the North Pole, which was crazy.
Wow.
Crazy, my friend. I mean,
were you in a nuclear sub?
Oh, yeah. It's really, I haven't even talked about this maybe to one or two people in my life. We popped up probably 300 yards from the North Pole, punched up through the ice. The ship had a rattle, and the rattle was because it had caught a cable, and the cable was caught around a screw. So it was so cold up there that they had to put crew members in this Arctic gear, and they only got to spend like a minute and 12 seconds outside of the ship, out on the ice, working on this thing, and they would have to run back in, and another crew would run back down, climb down the sail, climb down the sail, go out at the back, cut away, go back in, come back.
Otherwise, just frostbite on your nose or
frostbite,
whatever.
Anything that was exposed was going to get frostbite.
That's amazing.
Yep.
There are a couple of super harrowing scenes in here. I love how you revisit the battle of the British battleship Hood, and then the disabling of the German this sort of dreadnought-type battleship, Bismarck.
Yeah, Bismarck. The reason why we did that is because Bismarck suffered the same damage that the Intrepid did. And, back then, all ship captains in the entire world knew this. First off, let's go, before we even talk about, the Bismarck, when carriers first were introduced and the idea of a carrier was introduced, most navies in the world thought, this is full-duggery. This is stupid.
Yeah.
This will never work. First off, you can't get an airplane to take off from a postage stamp. Well, first off, we need to know that an airplane did take off from a postage stamp before the Wright brothers even flew their first powered plane. A lot of people don't know that. There was a guy who was the head of the Smithsonian Institute, Langley, Professor Langley, who literally said, I know we can make this happen. And he made it happen. And then 2 weeks later, the Wright brothers flew their plane. So, when it came time for us to write this, now all of a sudden carriers, we recognize how powerful a carrier would be as a fighting force when, the Japanese took Pearl Harbor. And because you can project your power hundreds of miles in front of your battle group without the battle group ever having to be there. So you can basically save your battleships and destroyers and cruisers by sending the planes out. So with the Bismarck, which was one of the biggest battleships in the world, everybody was afraid of it. It got hit by, again, a torpedo from a British ship, hit it in its rudder, and right there sent shivers in the spines of every single ship captain in the world. Same thing happened to the Yorktown in the Battle of Midway. It had to be scuttled. So when this ended up happening to the Intrepid, Captain Sprague, it went through his mind. What are we going to do? Are we going to end up having to scuttle this thing? Because they did not want the Japanese to be able to claim they sunk the Intrepid. The world knew that this was one of the biggest ships ever built. So,
the damage that the sinking of the Hood did to the British Empire's, public sentiment was just hugely demoralizing. And then reversal when they sink the German Bismarck. Did you talk about Billy Mitchell in this book, or am I confusing that with something else? Billy Mitchell is that American naval pilot. He demonstrated that an aircraft could sink a battleship back in 1921 or something like that.
Yes, we do talk about the fact that they put on an exercise to prove that an aircraft could sink one. They had him on anchor, and they had a ship at anchor, and they came in and they sunk it. And of course, every single admiral at the time probably cried, in the stands as they watched this happen, because it was like, you just set this up. It's not real until Pearl Harbor. Yeah. And when Pearl Harbor hit, then we realized. And then from that point forth, then we realized that using aircraft carriers to project our power against the Japanese, because the Japanese had literally, war solidified all of the islands in the North Pacific, and we're using those to eventually, they thought they were going to try to attack the United States. I don't think they would have ever gotten away with it, but that's what they thought they were going to do until we then started projecting our sea power against them.
Another great, can you talk about the Marshall Islands attack, which is another incredible scene in the book?
That was the first battle that the Intrepid was involved in. It went into Marshall Islands, actually was its airplanes completely decimated Kwajalein, at which the Japanese were using, as a staging area to go ahead and project more damage against the United States. We went in there, and they had, I don't think they lost 10 planes. I don't believe that was how many they lost. They lost maybe less than that, and literally flattened Kwajalein. Then they turned around and went from Kwajalein to Truk. Flattened Truk. Almost destroyed it completely. As a matter of fact, there was an opportunity for the sailors to get off for a minute and go inshore to have a little rest and relaxation. However, there was nothing there for them to rest and relax on because we flattened it all.
Yeah, right. And a big turning point in the Pacific theater of World War II. We started then really going on offense.
That's right. The Japanese knew we were coming. Yeah. And when the Intrepid pulled out of Truk, was on its way to its next assignment, that's when it got struck by that Japanese torpedo. Got hit, and, the rudder being jammed 45 degrees to port made the ship kind of careen out of control. And at the time, Intrepid was one of, I believe it was 3 different aircraft carriers that were part of one of the biggest armadas that we had ever put together. So they put the aircraft carriers in the middle, and then all around the aircraft carriers are destroyers or cruisers or submarines or things to protect the carrier. But now you've got this carrier that's careening out of control like a bad pinball machine. It was and almost ran into the Essex. And had it hit the Essex, that would have probably been one of the worst collisions at sea that had ever happened at that point in time. Because you got to remember, there's 3,000 plus people on board the Intrepid. There was 3,000 plus people on the Essex.
And this is the grand climax of the book, and it gives nothing away because you have to read it to believe it. But it takes this heroic ingenuity of the captain and all the people around the captain to get the Intrepid safely back to a port, because it's presently in the same condition the Bismarck was, which is just a sitting target in the water. And the
Japanese were looking for it. They knew they hit it, but they didn't know where it was. And so you've got this thing kind of careening and going zigzag, trying to go straight. And the captain, they thought about paravades. They thought about maybe bringing a couple of destroyers up next to it to tow it, but you couldn't tow an aircraft. It's close to 1,000 feet long. You can't tow this thing with a barge or a destroyer. And so, somebody said in the group, and we dug through as many, diaries and things that we could, where we tried to capture that conversation where somebody threw out the Sprague, well, what if we put a sail? And he went, we'll take the sail and we'll affix it to the bow of the ship over the hawse pipe and over the, the riggings for where they drop the anchor. And if we put this sail up there, it might be able to catch enough wind to counterbalance the way the rudder was forcing the ship to turn, keeping it straight, and it worked. And they sailed
it was so great because
2,500 plus miles.
Your earlier callbacks in the book about the sailing frigates of the early naval history
Yes.
was such an interesting device too, because then the Intrepid itself has to make that same callback and figure out how do we sew together a sail after the canvas with this canvas, and they do it. It's amazing.
Well, people don't know. That's another thing you don't understand. Once we started using gas and diesel power and using motors, the sail rating, which is a rating that a person would have in the Navy, kind of went by the wayside.
So when you were in the Navy, were you out in sailing boats? Did you have to learn how to sail?
That's part of the thing that's so great about Captain Sprague. At the Naval Academy, every single person that goes to the Naval Academy, when you go there, the first year you're there, you end up taking sailing classes.
Like dinghy sailing.
Like dinghy sailing. And you can even move yourself all the way up to yawl. I actually joined the sailing squadron, which allowed us to take some boats out over the weekend, and over weekends and long days. So we had some 3 masters and some 2 masters. So we were yawls. We were able to take those out. So it's ingrained in you, the idea of sailing. So it had been taught to Sprague. It had been taught to all the officers who went to the Naval Academy, but they never thought they were going to have to rely on something that ancient of technology to actually save.
I'm amazed there were enough materials on board to do it.
And guess what? That's the thing I wanted to talk about when it comes to the sailmaker rating. It's terrible to say, but the sailmaker rating at that time was really the guy who was sewing the body bags. And on the Intrepid, they didn't have sailmen. They didn't have a lot of canvas. So they basically made this kind of like an all-hands-on-deck kind of a whichever division can produce the most canvas, you're going to win. So these guys were taking off hatch covers, finding, there were a few hammocks, getting hammocks, all the little rescue
Covers
ships.
on lifeboats.
Covers on lifeboats. They pulled them all together, dragged them up to one area on the ship, and then literally sewed it together, and then had to drag this 300 square foot thing through all those hallways and passageways and affix it to the front of the ship, which was crazy. And part of this was because, ships have so many little doors that are watertight doors. That was part of what saved the Intrepid. This was a captain who believed in damage control and believed in training for damage control. So every day that ship was underway, there was always some training exercise going on what you can do. They even trained on the East Coast before they went through the Panama Canal. What happens if the rudder gets jammed? Because they recognized what happened to the Bismarck. They recognized what happened to the Yorktown. So they trained for it. So they understood, but they didn't train thinking I'm going to build a sail. They just trained, using the engines to go forward and backwards. They trained as much as they could. And they also trained to close watertight doors. That's what saved them. So it was the fact that all hands on deck participated. When that thing got hit by the torpedo, several of the sailors recount in their own diaries that it lifted them off the floor, threw them out of their racks. Think about this. Something 1,000 feet long gets hit on the end and shuddered that hard.
That's crazy.
So yeah, it was creepy, but it shows that, when we look at today, we're living in a time where we're living in a nation that is so divided in so many different directions. We're divided over toothpaste. We're divided over, it doesn't matter what it is. If we thought about the example that this ship set, these are 3,000 people coming from desperate places all over the country, came together to recognize we are not going to let the Japanese claim this as a victory. We're not going to let them take this, and we want to take the fight back to them. So they came together and figured out how to get it done. They got every little scrap of canvas that they could find, canvas made out of hemp, believe it or not. People need to recognize that even during this period of time, we had a hemp for victory campaign across America because we still needed every rope, every sail that was on ships in that period of time was made out of hemp. Why? Because hemp doesn't dry rot as badly in salt water. And so, and we started running out of hemp when the war started. So there was actually, farmers across the country were begged and asked to grow hemp so that we could support the war effort. There just happened to be just enough for them to be able to pull together a 300 square foot sail.
That's incredible.
Yeah.
It's an incredible story. And as you and I were just saying, we now here in New York benefited. The Intrepid sitting a few blocks west of us right now. and is a museum that draws 1 million visitors a year.
Air, Sea, and Space Museum, and literally, I got to tell you something. People from all over the country will recount stories of having gone there for field trips and other things. Because I was just there 2 weeks ago. I'm going to be there this coming Sunday, doing a book signing on board. It's just an incredible. You got to take 2 or 3 days to spend on that thing.
Yeah. That's amazing. And, we're currently in Fleet Week, so good timing for all this.
Absolutely. It's going to be good.
Yeah. Before we get into the lightning round, I wanted to ask you a couple final questions. You've written this with David Fisher, who's a talented partner, but are there other books coming?
He's one of, I believe, our most prolific writers of our day. I think he's written close to 90 books. 25, 30 plus have been New York Times bestsellers. He and I just had a conversation 2 nights ago. We're trying to pick what topic number 2 is going to be because we want to do 2 or 3 more books.
Are you sticking with a naval theme?
You know what? We're sticking with a theme of history and stories that need to be told.
Okay.
Stories that people need to understand. I don't want to throw out which one because we're not arguing about it. We're going back and forth. I keep saying, well, I want to do this. He keeps saying, well, I want to do this. And I'll say, well, they can do that one and we can do that. We can put those together, So we'll come up with it, and I think we're going to have a good decision in the next couple of weeks. But we really, really, really want to work on book 2.
Okay, good. Well, if you happen to write a book about, Joe Biden's demise and the media cover-up, you'll be on every television show on the planet during Pub Week.
I would rather write about things that can bring us together.
Yeah.
And I think, that's part of the reason why, when you read this book, this is really a testament to teamwork. It's a testament to dedication to the nation rather than dedication to my individualism.
Yeah.
So I want to write about things that really talk about when America was best. And when America was best is when we all got together to figure out how to make the next step.
Well, would you ever, last question before lightning round, but would you ever consider politics? Oz got into it. You could bring us together potentially in that way and go back to your earliest high school days when you were doing some local politics.
It's very funny. If you read my high school yearbook, it said I was most likely to be the president of the United States in 1994. Well, that passed. And I'm going to let that pass. I dabbled in politics during the show for a little bit, but I'm just so disgusted at the way that we look at and think about politics. I don't want to have that be the last chapter of my life.
Yeah.
I do not.
Well, unless you could change the way we think about it, because you're such a talented person with so much great experience and such a healthy way of looking at the world. I think you could do some good stuff.
I would like to. I think I have a lot to say, and I think my perspective is truly. I don't think a person can figure out what I am because I'm not right, I'm not left, and so many people use this term. I'm an independent, but I'm going to tell you, I base my opinions on decisions I make about individual ideas or individual things. Mm-hmm. So if you present it to me today, you say, what do you think about Pellegrino? I've got an opinion about Pellegrino. What do you think about ice and cranberry juice? I got an opinion about that. They may be completely dipoled, but I think that's the value of being able to think. We so often right now don't even think for ourselves. We have somebody else, and of course this little stupid thing right here, we punch in, we don't come up with an idea for ourselves. We want this thing to give me the idea. It's people who are listening and tuning in right now. They're probably, some of them are mad at me, some of them are mad at me. I don't know why they'd be mad at me, but if they are mad at me, they're angry because I may have said something along the way that just irked them on one thing because it went against something that somebody else said to them last week.
It's impossible to be aligned with everything on a platform up and down the platform.
Correct.
And the two-party platform thing is really hard to...
so ignorant.
You got to go sort of person by person, issue by issue.
Sure.
You just picked up your phone there for a second, which reminded me of something I did want to ask you, because when you're doing your show, and since you always have connected with students and talked a lot about that sort of thing. And what are your thoughts on screens and social media, and how would you be connecting to...
I'd throw that thing against the wall and get rid of it. I'm going to tell you something. I mean, I now here I say that, and I use it from time to time when I want to look something up. And I want to make sure. But now I'm so angry about the fact that there's so much deep fake crap. I was just sitting out in your lobby. I got this message on my phone telling me that the New York State Department of Motor Vehicles is coming after me because I've got a ticket that I haven't paid. I haven't had a New York State...
I just got that same text.
Is that crazy?
Yeah, Yes, that's crazy. I just got that. And
I
it
have
says
a
you're going to
Florida
get a
driver's
fine. And
Yes.
Yeah.
What is this? I mean, so until we figure this out, I think more people ought to start pushing this thing aside. You know what I mean? Let's go back to this right here.
Yeah.
You and me looking each other in the eye and having a conversation. Why can't we do that?
Yeah.
Why can't we remember that that's what's going to help us get to the next level? It's not anything else.
Well, I worry about, we have young kids, they're 11, 14, and 15, and we have yet to see the amount of damage that, the constant screen thing is doing to kids. Well, let's see how it all plays out in 10 years, but it's probably not very good.
I think it's doing the damage in the fact that it's stopping them from being critical thinkers. They don't have to even think about, if you ask your child when you go home today, I don't know, would you say what ages are they?
15, 14, 11.
15 and 14. So 15 and 14-year-olds, if you ask them today, what do you think about the idea of bullying? Well, they're going to go in their room and they're going to say, I'm going to make sure Dad understands that I know a lot about bullying. They're going to type it in here, and whatever they get that says bullying here, they're going to come out and regurgitate that to you rather than even stopping for a second and thinking about what these words really mean. Yeah. And I'm not, saying this is your kids, but it's like most kids in this country. They don't have, and at that age, they don't have the wherewithal to be able to process that kind of information. So, yeah, I'm hoping that we start recognizing that there's so much fake stuff up there that maybe we ought to start trying to figure out some truths.
Yeah, I love that. Oh well, so you gotta I don't know, not do the show again, but do something. Get out there and run for office and fix this stuff.
My goodness, thank you. Well, your lips to God's ears. So if anybody listening out there, I'll sit in that booth next to you. There you go.
All right, lightning round for Montel Williams. Favorite book as a kid?
As a kid. Well, let me think. If I go way back in that time, Huckleberry Finn.
That's a great one. Yeah.
Yeah.
And Percival Elliott just won the Pulitzer for a reimagining of Jim.
Oh, wow.
It's called James. It's a great book.
Sure.
Book or books you're reading now?
This is one that just came across my desk. It's called Black Sun Rising, and this one is by an author by the name of Otho Eskin. It's literally taking a hard look at our international politics of today and taking a hard look, and it's a novel, so they're basically imagining what would happen if the Nazis tried to take over this country, utilizing some of their, nefarious processes of World War II and try to take over this country. And then you look at how we're setting ourselves up to maybe have something like that happen right now. So I'm reading them. I'm going to have them on my podcast in a week.
Nice.
So, yeah, it's going to be good.
All right. The worst thing about living on a ship?
Space. No. If it's a submarine, it's the stink. I'm sorry, guy. I'm going to give out the real. Because remember, when you close that hatch, excuse my mouth when I say this, every fart.
Yeah. Well, your
every
shipmates must have been like, "Oh Jesus, Montel's working out again." This is
I'm telling you, man. You would have a locker, or you'd have a sea bag of clothing that you would take only on the submarines. When I come home from a submarine, I leave it in the garage because it stinks. Even if you washed it 12 times, it stinks.
No saving it.
Because every single thing that oil, you name it, all permeates the atmosphere.
Is there a laundry machine on the ship?
They wash clothes, but it's stinky water. Yeah. Right? So, that was the worst thing. And also, for me, as a cryptological officer in charge of a det, my rack on board, my bed on board the ship was under the bed of the executive officers. Nobody slept there until I went on board, until a cryptological det would go on board, and then they flipped this thing down. So that rack was so small that literally, if you wanted to turn over, you had to slide your upper body out, flip over, slide it back in.
Oh, my gosh.
So, yeah, space.
That's probably luxurious compared to like the 1914 submarines.
Oh, my goodness. That was like being in the Hilton. So being at the Ritz-Carlton on, sort of fast tax. They ate the best. That's one of the things. Submarines, I don't know what's happening these days, but back in the day that I was on them, we got the best food.
Is that right? Oh, wow.
Heck yeah.
All right.
And it was crazy because, you always have fresh stuff for the first 15, 16 days. Then, of course, the fresh stuff goes bad. So you literally walked on your food. Food was in cans, right? Cans were almost all the same size, gallon-sized cans.
Oh, my gosh.
They would put these gallon-sized cans on all of the passageways and then put boards over top of them. So when you went away, every single space on the floor is covered with food. By the time you come back home, you ate your way out of it. A lot more headroom. Yeah, crazy.
That's funny. I didn't know that.
Yeah, weird, right?
The medal or commendation you received of which you're most proud?
From one of my submissions, I got a meritorious service medal, and yeah,
Stuff you can't talk about?
can't
happened?
talk about.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well,
Good stuff though.
the most memorable guest ever on the Montel Williams Show?
Wow. To tell you, I can't remember this little guy's name. There were two, really. I remember one guy's name. His name was Tavon Johnson. Tavon Johnson was a young man in Baltimore who, as a matter of fact, that show is what actually won me the Emmy as Best Talk Shows. It was a young man who was 15 at the time. His mother was a crackhead, had disappeared, left him home with his 11-year-old brother by himself. She was nowhere to be found always. And Tavon, this is crazy, I'm going to tell you. He literally went around robbing drug dealers to get enough money to pay the rent and do the things.
Aren't there easier people to rob? My God,
Could
that sounds
be, yeah,
suicidal.
should be. But it was back then, you know. I mean, this was what he did. And did it to the point that they finally, you know, when we had him on the show and we told a story, the Baltimore Police Department came in and helped him out. They got him together. We actually found his mother, got her in rehab, tried to help her. I tried to help him. But I had another show where I had a young man, and I cannot remember his name right now. It's off the top of my head. But this is a little boy who was 7 years old, who was raised by a veteran mother, who knew she had brain cancer. And during the last 6 months of her life, she basically taught her son at 7 years old how to take care of himself. She put envelopes in her closet with the rent, electric bill, water bill on it, showed him where to go. Mother passes away in the house, in the kitchen, falls down to the floor and dies in the kitchen. He basically goes and gets perfume out of the bedroom, sprays it on his mother, covers her face because it was starting to rot with a towel, and took care of himself for almost 40 days.
Oh my God, that's the
And
saddest
nobody
thing
knew.
I've ever heard.
Nobody knew. I mean, he literally went, paid the bill for the electricity, went and paid the bill for the rent, went and paid the bill for the water. Every day, got up in the morning, made breakfast, with stepping over his mother in the kitchen.
Oh my gosh.
We had that show, and fortunately, a family stepped forward that wanted to adopt him and help take
Do
care
you
of
have
him.
any idea where he was 7 in 1996?
Yeah, no, 7, this is 1996, 97. I have no idea where he is today. I should probably try to look that up.
That's incredible. That's an
it's a crazy
incredible story.
story.
Wow.
Yeah. You know, I want to, as people think back on talk shows, they go, oh yeah, I remember you guys had Sylvia Brown and you had all this stuff and you had all the big boobs and you had this, that, and the other. And we did, but we also did some things that I'm very proud of. I mean, we did a show that changed the entire automobile industry in the world. Why? Because I used to do a lot of shows about abduction and things like that. And we had a young lady who got abducted out of a parking lot, got thrown into a trunk of a car. The guy was driving down the highway, and she punched out the taillight, stuck her hand out the back of the car. Somebody saw it, called the police. That ended up rescuing her.
Yeah.
It was because of that show that automobile manufacturers in the world put trunk releases inside of the trunk of a car. It would have never been there had that not happened.
Yeah, I remember your show being amazing. I know there were you know, other shows like Springer, who I actually I really think Springer's, you know, a super smart guy.
Sure.
And, you know, some of the shows went a little haywire there, but also a politician, by the way. So wasn't he governor or something?
He was deputy mayor or vice mayor of Cincinnati. And I'm not saying this to make you question your theory of him, but homeboy paid a prostitute with a check when he was running for office, talking about cleaning up prostitution and graft in Cincinnati. Smart guy. He was okay. He was all right.
He was a talented performer.
He was a talented performer.
I'll give him that. Book to recommend to anyone deployed at sea.
Hunt for Red October.
Oh, that's a great one.
I tell you something about.
The first edition of that book was published by Naval Press.
Correct. And Tom Clancy, as a matter of fact, the job that I had at the Navy, I happened to be at the National Security Agency when that book came out. The job that I had, they literally brought his book down to our department and had us review it for security violations. And it had multiple in there.
You had to redact things out of there?
Well, no.
Or it was already out,
He
I
had
guess.
published it. So we were looking at it. And then, you know, the military and
some of the discussions of Russian subs should not have been allowed.
And the military and the State Department and the National Security Agency back then had a moniker, we can't confirm it, deny. Yeah. So if we confirmed it, that there were violations, then everybody would start digging through the book looking for where the violations were. So we just let him pass. But
what was his background, Clancy?
Clancy worked for the Naval Institute Press in Annapolis, and I actually had a conversation with him way back before he passed, way back then. He literally gleaned all of his information by going to banquets and other things, sitting at tables with senior officers who thought they were pulling down, the cone of silence while they were sitting at the table talking smack. He got all of his information that way.
That's amazing.
But he also wrote about, ships and things at the Naval Institute Press.
He probably burned a few bridges doing that with people.
He pissed off a lot of people. I'm telling you that. He really did. He angered a lot of people because, it's like, I and David, there's an area of what I did while on active duty that I thought, this is 30 years ago, 25 years ago, so I should be able to talk about this. More than 30 years ago, I should be able to talk about this. And so I wanted to literally consider our next book to be some information about some of my submissions. But I thought, let me reach out to some people and ask them if this is okay. So I talked to some people, very senior people in our Pentagon, and got a note back about 3 weeks ago saying, Montel, look, I know that some of this information is out there, but we would really prefer that you didn't do that. And, I honor my oath.
Yeah. That's good. Not everyone does. There are a lot of former writing all sorts of...
Yeah, I honor mine. I will never speak about those things.
Favorite... let's see. Oh, the book, that was Hunt for Red. I'm getting lost in my own questions here. So Hunt for Red October. We got I love that. And the movie was great, too. That kind of delivered.
I'm hoping this becomes a movie. As a matter of fact, fingers crossed for me, my friend. Please keep them crossed. I'm meeting with a very significant agent tomorrow who said, I want to help you move this forward. Let's see. Because I think this is
It's so cinematic. It's a great...
When you read it, it's a cinematic novel.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, You've got great characters. You develop the characters on the page, too, and it would be amazing as a movie.
I think so.
All right, so a good segue. Favorite few recent TV shows to recommend?
It's very funny. I and my wife are, baby, don't get mad at me for saying this, but we are addicted to streaming. We literally every day, we sit down at about 6:30. I eat dinner early. We sit down at about 6:30 and we say, what are we going to watch tonight? Click, click, click. Go to Hulu, go to Netflix, go to Paramount. I have been stuck. I'm telling you, I know a lot of people out there probably watched it, the Handmaid's Tale. Come on now. Yeah. Crazy good. Yeah. And I also like The Last of Us.
Oh, that's great. Yes. We had
Are you kidding me?
Craig Mazin was on the show. He's the showrunner.
That show, I was hooked, but then I've seen them all. There's not a streamer that's gone off in the last year that I haven't seen.
Someone told me The Handmaid's Tale recent season is good. We've watched like the first 2 or 3 seasons or something like that.
I just saw the last episode, or next to the last episode, 2 nights ago. Are you kidding me? My goodness, man. I'm telling you, that thing blows me away.
Yeah. There's so much good stuff out there.
Yeah, there's so much good stuff out there. But yeah, if I had to really, if you never watch Breaking Bad,
oh, that's amazing. Yeah.
I will go back to that every other year and act like I didn't see it.
Yeah.
Try to act like I don't want to think about what's happening next because I know what's going to happen, but I'll watch it anyway because it's just so good, so well written. I'm good friends with R.J. Mee, who's a young man who played the kid with cerebral palsy. And R.J. and I have spoken a lot over the years, and I go back and watch that. He did an incredible job on that show. I don't know if you know who he is or know him.
No, I don't know him.
He's the young man who played the son, Walt's son with cerebral palsy.
Bryan Cranston's
son, yeah.
All right, yep.
And, he depicts a person with cerebral palsy that's a little bit more advanced than what he has himself, but such a good actor and such a good job.
Yeah. That show was amazing. That was like truly in the golden age of it, too.
Absolutely.
That show was amazing. All right, last questions from Montel Williams. One piece of advice for the audience on any topic.
I have lived by a saying myself most of my life. I alone own the definition of who I am. I defy anybody to tell me who I'm going to be. I'm a kid who was born in a ghetto. I'm not supposed to be this guy that I am today. If you listen to, the hype, the neighborhood I was born in, I think it was 3 out of every 4 kids that were in that neighborhood went to jail or died. Okay? But just because that happened to them doesn't mean it has to happen to me. I will define who I am until the day I die. Somebody might say, well, a little late in life to be writing another book. No, son. I'm going to write a couple more books. If I feel like going back to television, I'm going to beat the bushes as hard as I can to get back. Right now, I'm trying to see if I can, get involved in the motion picture with this book, because I think this book deserves to be depicted on film and on the big screen. So understand that you alone own the definition of who you are. All you need to do is then find people who can help you get there.
Yeah, I love it. That's awesome.
Thank you.
Montel, this was great. Thank you so much.
Thank you, sir. I really appreciate it. Absolutely. Thank you.